Welcome to Formula Input Cell References and Assumption Tables. Hey, this video is for people that are trying to learn how to use cell references. In specific, it's for my Business 216 class. Now, there's 15 examples here, and if you scroll through the sheet, you can see there's a sheet where we'll work on and then the answer. So if you download this, you can have your answers. Business 216 is required to go up through 10. If anyone's curious, though, I'm going to go on all the way through 11 through 15 and show you some even more advanced tricks. Now, cell references in formulas. This number right here is called a formula input. It's a commission rate. And because it has the possibility that that number can change, you do not type it into formulas. You don't go like this. You just don't do that. It is inefficient in the long run. Hard to edit. If your spreadsheet is filled with lots of numbers, it's really hard to find whatever cell, whatever formula, and update it. So what do we do instead of hard coding into our formula? We put it into a cell and refer to it. So we in our formula. Now there's 4 kinds of cell references. If you click over here, there's a little something I wrote. There is a relative cell reference like A1. As you copy it, it moves relatively. Absolute cell references, a $ in front of the column reference, a $ in front of the row reference, means it's locked in all directions. No matter where you copy that formula, it's going to still look at A1. This is a mixed cell reference with the column reference locked, but not the row. So as you copy a formula with this, it'll be locked going to the side, absolute cell reference, but not when it's going down. It'll move as a relative cell reference. This one has the $ in front of the row reference. So as you copy it down across the rows, it's locked on A1. But if you copy it across the columns, it'll move from A1 to B1 to C1. Those are the 4 types of cell references. Let's go ahead and see if we can get started here. First thing is, here's our formula. Our formula is always going to look 1 cell to the left. So for each cell, each formula will look 1 cell left, but we always want to be locked on that. So our formula would be equals 1 cell to my left times this cell B2, and I'm going to lock it with the F4 key. Now, most people in the world, it's some huge percentage, or know how to do this, but very few people know anything besides a relative and an absolute. And it actually is not easy to learn how. This formula will work right here, and this is what most people do. Control Enter, double click, and send it down. I come down here, I can check that one, and sure enough, it's locked on B2. But watch this. I come up here, I hit F2 to put it in edit mode. Now my cursor's touching the cell reference, so I can hit my F4 key to put the $ in front of just the row reference. Now, what's going on here? I'm only going to copy this formula down across the rows. Right? It's going down, and as I copy down, it's going across the rows. So the only thing that has the possibility of changing is a 2. And I want it locked on 2, so that's all I need. Control Enter, double click, and send it down. If I come here and check, sure enough, it worked. Let's look at another example. 2. Same setup. I want to do commission rate times the cell above me. So I'm going to say equals 1 cell above times. And I'm going to click on that cell reference. Now, we're going to copy it across the columns here. And the way I remember where to put the $, because I have a choice in front of the number or the letter. I'm going to say my cursor here is the formula, and I'm going to move it in the direction that I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to move it up here, and I'm moving in the direction that I'm copying. Am I going across numbers or letters? I'm going across letters, so that's my trigger, my memorization trick to realize that I need the $ in front of the letter B. Remember, because it's B, right? If I didn't have this B here, right? Control Enter, if I copied it over one, look, what did the B do? I wanted it stuck on B, but it changed to C. So if you realize that you made a mistake and you say that C should have been B, then all you have to do is go back to the original formula, put a $ in front of the thing that changed, and it will work. Put a $ in front of the thing that changed to a C, so I'm going to put that $ in front of the B. Control Enter. And now when I copy it over, you can see it's locked. All right, so I'm going to copy it all the way to the end. All right, our next example Same thing. This is going up and down equals, but this is a gross pay times a tax rate. Oh, bummer, we have to pay our taxes. B2 all the way down. So since I'm going to move this formula, copy it down across the numbers, the rows, the dollar sign has to be in front of the number, the row reference. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Now in payroll, that won't work at all. You can see we have some extra decimals. If you click over on this sheet right here, really that is what you're supposed to have. You're supposed to round it officially. Round it to the penny, which is the second decimal. So you put a 2 there inside the round function. Copy it down, and you can see I've shown the format. So you can see it's all zeros. It went from this number with a bunch of extra partial pennies, which we don't have. We can't pay out partial pennies, and hack them off and round it, our official rounding rule. Let's go look at, actually, we're going to come over here to number 5. Here's awesome internets. This is one of the most common things done in Excel. We need to estimate future expenses, financial projections, budgets, whatever you want to call it. We have some January revenue we've estimated, some February revenue, and some March. But look at here. We have to estimate an administrative commission, equipment, marketing, and technical support expenses. Well, here's how you do it. You get these percentages, which are usually based off of past accounting information or whatever. You take averages of the past. On average, our administrative expense was always 11.75% of the revenue, right? Administrative, commission, equipment, marketing, technical support. This is called an assumption table. These are where our formula inputs. Notice the order of our expenses are the same in the assumption table. If that's true, and they are orientated vertically, then you can use mixed cell references, either the dollar sign in front of the column or dollar sign in front of the row, and create formulas for this column, this column, this column. In essence, the whole table out to June. So get this. This whole block of cells can get the same formula. All right, let's see how this works. And we're going to learn our very important rule of how to figure out, when you have a table of formulas, what type of cell reference you need. Let's just put the formula in first. I'm going to say revenue for January times that administrative percent. Now we have 2 cell references. I'm going to click in the first one. Now let me ask you a question. How many directions are there in Excel? Well, let's see. There's up and down across the numbers, and there's left to right across the columns. That's it. There are only 2 directions. From that, you can memorize. That means I have to ask 2 questions about my cell reference. If I ask both of these questions and answer them, I will get exactly the cell reference I need. Similarly, when we're done with here, then we'll go on to the next cell reference and ask 2 questions. All right, our first question, directions, up and down, left to right. I'm going to pick up and down across the numbers. When I copy this formula down, what do I want that B4 to do? When I move to here and here and here, does the formula, the cell reference B4 need to be locked on that January revenue? Yes, it does. Well, where do I need to put the dollar sign in front of the B or the number? Well, since I'm copying it down and I'm going across the numbers, the dollar sign has to go in front of the 4. So I hit the F4 once and twice. That's the first question. What do you do for the cell reference when you're going up and down? Now left to right. When I move the formula over to here and to here, do I want it locked on January, or do I want it to move relatively to February? That's right. I want the B to move. So when I get over here, I need that cell reference to be C4, which is exactly what we want. So no dollar sign in front of the B. Asked 2 questions, answered 2 questions. Now we go on to the next cell reference. Now I'm going to pick up and down again first. So when I go down to the commissions row, do I want this green one to move down 1 also to the commission row? Yes, indeed. So when I copy this down across the rows, I do not want it locked. I wanted a relative cell reference. So I don't put any dollar sign anywhere. Not in front of the row. Now, what about when I go zip over to February and then to March? Do I want this box to move? like that, relatively, which in essence right now is like 10 cells below. No way. I want it locked on the B column because the assumptions are always in the B column. So I'm going to hit my F4 key 1, 2, 3 times. All right, so I answered the question, what do I want to do when it's going down? What do I want left to right? That is the formula that will work in all cells. Control Enter. I'm going to click and drag, and it's a two-step process when you got a table of data formulas you're copying. Then I'm going to point to my fill handle with my little crosshair or angry rabbit. I'll click and drag. Not over to the totals, just over to June. Now, how do I verify that my formula is correct? I started my formula here. The best way, and really the only cell you need to check, is you go over to the diagonally furthest one away and hit the F2 key. Is that G4 looking at June revenue? Yes, indeed. What about B21? Is B21 technical support, which is exactly what I want? That is profound. Not very many people in the Excel working world know how to do that. And do you see that we created what? 6 times 5? How many? What's that? 6 times 5. 30 formulas with just one formula. Now I want to show you an alternative to copying it down and over. Remember, I'm going to Control Z, Z. We had to copy it down and then over, right? Well, Control Z, Z. If you know that your whole table of data is going to get a formula from the outset, then just highlight the whole all the cells that get the same formula. And in the active cell, build your formula. Equals the January revenue times this 11.75 administrative. And I'm going to lock that one in front of the comma, F4, F column. That formula is the formula we just created. We copied it down and over before, but because we've highlighted all the cells in advance and we put the formula in the active cell, to populate all the cells with the formula, you hold Control and tap Enter. If you do that in an interview when they're giving you an Excel test, they will say, whoa, wow, how did you do that? They'll fall out of character and go, wow. All right, so that is a table of formulas. Now I want to go back over here because this is a hard concept. I've been teaching this class a long time, and even for myself, when I learned how to do this, it was hard. And here's what I would always do. When I would forget, I'd come, because I know how a multiplication table should work, right? In this cell right here, I need 4 times 4, right? Over in this cell, I need equals 7 times 6, right? So I know how this table works. But what I'm really interested in, Control Z, is building one formula here and copying it down and over. Because look, it's got a bunch of numbers here and a bunch of numbers here. And at any intersection, it wants the column header and the row header. All right, I'm going to highlight the whole table in advance like that. And I'm going to zoom this in so we can see it a little bit better. And there's the active cell. I'm first going to build my formula equals whatever's at the top of this column times whatever is at the head of this row. And I'm going to ask my two questions. Now, B2, when I copy it down, do I want it locked on that? Yes, I do. So I'm going to put the $ in front of the number. Now, what about this B2? When I copy it over to this column and this column, do I want it locked on this number 1, or do I need it to move relatively? I need it to move relatively, so no $ in front of the B. I've asked the two questions of that one. I've answered them both. Now I move on to the next. A3. That right there, when I copy it down, do I want it locked on the number 1, or do I want it to move relatively? I want it to move relatively, so I'm going to hit the F4 key. Actually, I don't need to do anything there. I just leave it blank. No $ in front of that number. Now, what about when I copy it across the columns? Do all of the formulas in this row need to be looking at that number 1? Yes, indeed. So I hit the F4 key 1, 2, 3 times because I'm copying it across the columns. I need it locked, so I lock that column with an A3. Now, I've already highlighted all the cells in advance, so what do? Control and Enter. And boom, you can go to the diagonally furthest one away and F2 it and see if we got it right. It's got that blue one there, and it's got that green one there. Perfect. Escape. Control Home to get back up here. Now, Took me about 6 months to become fluent with all the cell references, and every time I was in the middle of a project and I would forget, I just quickly whip out this multiplication table, and that was a great memorization trick. All right, let's look at this one. It's similar to the budget. We have royalty expenses, manufacturing expenses, and administrative expenses, but they are orientated horizontally in the table where our formulas are. That means our assumption table must be set up horizontally also, or we can't use mixed cell references. All right, so I'm going to highlight the whole range of cells. Here's some net sales and some estimations for our expenses equals that net sales. And now this net sales, when I copy it over across the columns, each one of these cells is going to need that number. So I want it locked in front of the column. So I'm going to hit the F4 key 1, 2, 3 times. But that B3, when I copy it down, it needs to move relatively to the next book title. So no $ in front of the number. Times. And then I need my royalty expense. Now, let's think about this. When I copy to the manufacturing expense and then administrative, do I need this cell reference to move to manufacturing and then administrative? Yes, indeed. So no $ in front of the letter. Now, what about when I copy down? This whole column is for royalty expense, so I need it locked when I copy it down. So I'm going to hit the F4 key and put a $ in front of the number. Control Enter. What is that? That's the fence. If you're looking at this head on, it's a fence. If you're looking at it from the top, it's a railroad, right? That just means the columns aren't wide enough. So I'm going to come over here and double highlight the 3 columns and double click between any column, and it best fits those. Now, I'm sure one of you or 5 of you or a bunch of you are thinking, wait a second. When we did payroll over here, why do we have to use the round function? But when we're doing budgeting like this, it's not as important. The reason why is usually these are estimates, and we can just use formatting to show 2 decimals, and that's fine. But with payroll, forget it. These are actual, the tax is an actual deduction that's coming out of your paycheck. And especially if you're going to total up a bunch of deductions, you got to use the round. All right, so this is a little example of a budget, an estimation. Now, on tests, I like to try and trick people. So let's go over and look at number 7 here. I'll try and do something like give you a little table. And this is the same thing. It's just a net income. But look at the expenses. I need to build formulas, and there's an expense and then a second expense listed vertically. But how did I list them in the assumption table? Horizontally. When you get this situation, a bunch of labels in your table vertical, but the assumptions table listed horizontally, you are never in a million years going to be able to do mixed cell references. Incorrect setup. So on the test, I like to give a big table, and I show one assumption table, and then I'll show another assumption table. Notice these are orientated vertically. These are also orientated vertically, so I can go ahead and do mixed cell references. This is the 4th kind of formula like this, so I'll do this one in super fast motion. Equals, hey, our revenues, F4. This needs to be locked going down, but not to the side because it needs to move over to February, times our percentage, operating and general, locked going to the side, but not going down. So F4 in front of 3 times to put it in front of the B. Control Enter. And I can come over here and verify. And sure enough, I got the right one there, the right one there. Those of you that are in the class, when you download this workbook, these blank sheets, you should be filling these out. So I'm, in essence, giving you a heads up for the test. I'm giving you 10 little practices for the test. Now, this is a great one here. This is going to involve some different, all the different types of cell references. Mortimer's Furniture, and we have some wholesale costs. And notice we listed the wholesale costs down here. But I'm going to give you the formula for how to calculate. Well, let's just do this one first. Our goal is list the costs and then calculate the retail selling price at a 50% retail markup, 55 markup, and 60% markup. And then calculate a formula to give me the profit for each one of these products at 50%, 55, and 60% markup. Wholesale costs, sofa, lamp, end table, chair. These are all down here in the assumption table. Well, this one, I can say equals however many cells below. That's a relative cell reference. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cells below. Control Enter. And then I can drag it down, right? And sure enough, this, ooh, look at that. That is not right. It copied that formatting from above. So I'm immediately going to point to the Smart tag and say fill without formatting. Much better. Now I'm going to click on this last cell. Perfect. It's still looking 10 cells below. That's called a relative cell reference. Now, I'm just going to give you the formula for this. If you were in my business math class, then you'd have to know this formula. But this is how, if you have the cost and you know the markup for sell price, not for cost. There's also markups on cost. This is markup for sell price. Here's your formula. You take whatever the wholesale cost is and divide it by, in parentheses, 1 minus the markup on sell price. All right, now, don't worry about the formula. Let's just worry about cell references. There's some cell references across the top, just like our multiplication table. And there's some cell references down the column, just like our multiplication table. Let's ask our 2 questions. When I go over to the next estimate for, or retail price at 55 and then 60, do we need to be using this cost in each one of those formulas? Yes, indeed. So when I move it across the columns, I need it locked. So I'll hit my F4 and put $sign in front of the column. When I copy it down, do I need it locked on sofa, or do I need it to move to lamp, and then end table, and then chair? I need it to move, so no $sign in front of the row reference. Let's go on to this one. We got a whole column that needs to look at that 50%. So where does the $sign go? When I copy it down, needs to be locked on the row reference. So I hit the F4 key and put it in front of the row reference. But look at this. When I get this formula over to this column, does it still need to be looking at 50%? No way. It needs to be looking at 55. So no $sign in front of the column reference. Control Enter. I'm going to click and drag it down. Oh, same problem. See that right there? So I'm going to immediately point to the Smart tag. By the way, if you don't immediately point to the Smart tag and go on to do something else, the Smart tag is gone. Fill without formatting, and then click and drag to the side. Come over and check my last one, and sure enough, beautiful. Now, let's do our last formula. This is profit. Notice we have a, in essence, table of retail prices. We need those retail prices all here. Each one of these cells, same size, needs to be looking at this. So when we're here, right, this formula needs to be looking at that sell price, right? But the cost, we only have one column of cost. So let's figure out how to do this. I'm going to highlight this whole range of cells here. And in the active cell at the top, I'm going to build my base formula equals whatever the sell price is minus whatever the cost is. Now let's think about this. We already kind of talked about the sell price one. No matter where this formula goes, it needs to be a relative cell reference. Right here, it needs to look there. When I copy it to this cell, it needs to look right there, which is how, what? 1, 2, 3 cells to my left. How about when I'm down here in this cell? 1, 2, 3 cells to my left. There's the sell price for whatever this item is at 55%. And is that what I need there? There's 55. Yeah. So that is a relative cell reference. In both directions, no locking. But what about this one? When I copy, there's my cost, right? When I copy over to my estimate at 55 and 60, do I need it locked on the cost? Yes, I do. So it needs to be locked across the column. F4, F4, F4. Now, what about when I go down, when I copy it down? Does it need to be locked on the 275, or does it need to move to 125 and then 225? It needs to move. So no $sign in front of that number. Now I've highlighted all the cells in advance, so I hold Control and tap Enter. I go to the last cell, double click, and look, it got the 60% markup $250 sell price minus the $100 sell price. That is exactly what I need for this picture item here. That is the profit. So that's another example of how to do a bunch of different cell references. Now, number 10. Oh, this is an incredible cell reference trick. And we're going to learn a a couple things. We're going to learn how to use cell references to lock and not lock, relative and absolute. We're going to use a mixed cell reference. But we're also going to see how to do an expandable range. Now, what's the point of this table? We have some sales reps, some January sales. There's a running total. There's a running total. Let's just figure out if we wanted a running total, right? We could say that, and then we get to this formula right here. We could say this plus this. And that formula would actually work. That would be a running total. When I copy down here, I'd get the running total, right? So I'm, in essence, adding this one, then this one, then this one. Now, that's a pretty good formula here. And if you have a small data set, that is, or a large data set, that's probably the preferable way to go. But sometimes I forget that I have a different formula in the column, and like I go to do something, I forget, and I delete them all, forgetting that there was two different ones there. So there is an alternative. It is called, we're going to use the sum function with an expandable range. Now imagine if when we got in this cell, the sum function was looking there. But when we got to this cell, the sum function was looking there. And when we drag the sum function down, in this cell, it was looking at that range. See how each time we copy the formula down, the range expands a little bit? That's called an expandable range. And there's a way to do it if you know how to do cell references. Alt equals is the keyboard shortcut for AutoSum. And then I'm going to Shift colon. And then click on my B2. So what I've done is I've done B2 to B2. Now, if I copy this down, this would be a ridiculous formula because it would always be relative cell references. But watch this. Put your cursor right here and lock it going down across the row. So I'm going to hit F4, F4. That formula right there means part of this range is locked, but part of it's not. And that's how you do an expandable range. Control Enter. I'm going to double click and send it down. And let's just look at this. I'm going to click there. Did the range expand? Yes, it did. F2, did the Enter. F2, did the range expand? Yes, it did. If I control down arrow and come down to the bottom and hit F2, it expanded all the way down. That is totally awesome. Now watch this. This formula will work perfectly even when I copy it over to this column. Because notice I locked that row reference, but not the column. So when I move this formula over to here, let's just try it. Control C, Control V, hit F2. Did it work? Yes, it worked. Because the D wasn't locked, now it's looking one cell to my left. Now I can copy this formula down. And sure enough, that one is expanding too. So it requires for expandable ranges that you think, even though it's a range, we can lock one but not the other. You could actually do the reverse too. And in some situations, some advanced formulas, you might want to highlight the whole range, lock only part of it, and then when you copy it down, the range gets smaller. But from you lock the second one. Let me show you that. Equals. This is not a good example of it, but you could highlight the whole range. It's when you're doing formulas that sort. So then you could lock this one right here. The second one. Control Enter. And then when you copy it down, in essence, it's a contracting range. Now, this is not a good example. Well, it might be if you wanted the total at the top, right? Your sum function. And as you go down, you want it to get smaller by each amount. So that would be another use of this. All right, let's go over here for the Business 216 class. Those are the only ones that you have to watch. However, if you are curious what you might get in an advanced Excel class, we'll move on to some of these other ones. Now, in this situation here, we have a data set. We have month, sales rep, and sales. If I click on one of these cells and control down arrow, I can see there's, whoa, like over 1,300 rows. Control Home. I want a table, and the sales reps are listed just one time each. So Wendy, Victor, Tony, etc., Tiara. And I want a formula that'll add for Andrea, January, February, March. But the problem is, Andrea may have had lots of sales in January, February, March. So we've already seen in this class the sum if function. But here we have two criteria. When I get to this cell, I want to say, please add up all the sales from this column. When you see an Andrea in this column and a February, I'm sorry, an Andrea in this column and a February in this column. So how do we do that? That's summing with two criteria. So there's a great function in Excel 2007. It's called SUMIFS. SUMIFS. Now the SUMIFS function says, give me the sum range. Well, we're adding sales, so I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to click in the first cell and Control-Shift down arrow, and I'm going to hit the F4 key. The F4 key is awesome because not only does it lock it, but it jumps the screen back in view. And I need that range locked in both directions. No matter where I am in this table, it needs to be locked on that. Comma. Now, the criteria range, and what's awesome about SUMIFS with an S is their criteria range 1, criteria 1, criteria range 2. So different than the SUMIF function, the one with the S can have multiple criteria. So I'm going to pick Abdullah, the sales rep. I'm going to click in the top of this column, Control-Shift down arrow, and then hit the F4 key. Now that's locked in all directions, and I want it locked in all directions because no matter where I copy this formula, I need it looking at that column. Comma. But the criteria, click right here. Right now, the SUMIF will look through this whole column, and only when it finds an Abdullah will it say true and then go over and sum. But this criteria right here, notice when we copy from January to February, it still needs to be looking at Abdullah. March, April, still looking there. But when we copy it down across the rows, it needs to move relatively. So that means the dollar sign has to be in front of the column reference. Okay, so there's our criteria 1, comma, and now criteria range 2, it's going to be our month. I click on the top, Control-Shift down arrow, F4. The screen tip is just awesome. It will remind you that's my criteria range 2. It says, hey, please put a comma in, so I type a comma. Criteria range 2, that is going to be my January. And my January right there needs to be locked everywhere down this column. But when I move it over to February, it does not need to be locked. So copying it down across the rows needs to be locked, F4, F4, but not across the column. So when I copy over to here, it moves to February. And that's it. That's our second criteria. We close off the parentheses, Control-Enter. And now I'm going to drag it over first to April, because then I can simply double-click this fill handle and copy it down. And sure enough, if I go down to the last column, the last diagonally furthest away cell, F2, I can see it got the Wendy. Notice it's still looking at the blue range there, but it got the Wendy, and up at the top it got the I2. That green one there. I'm going to click Escape. So that's a great use for cell references. We used a column lock but not the row, and a row lock but not the column. Now, this function only exists in 2007 and 2010 coming out next year. If you don't have 2007 or 2010, then you'd have to use something like this. Here's a sum products formula, and you can download this workbook in the answer. And there it is. And it uses that same reference. One of them is locked only in front of the number. The other one's locked only in front of the column. All right, our 12th example. This is a great example because we're going to have a whole column of cell references that requires part of it locked and part of it not. Now, what we have here is we have sales rep, and there's only 4 sales reps that are listed right here. And then we have January, February, and March sales. And our goal is to build a little table with averages, right? So here it needs to look at Sue in this column, only pick out the Sues, and then from the February column, it needs to pick out the sales and average them. All right? So let's highlight this whole range. And we're going to use an Excel 2007-2010 function, average if. average if right there. So I'm going to double click average if. Not in earlier versions. I have a formula for earlier versions. The range. Well, that needs to be the range with the criteria. Then the criteria, then you put the average range. So the range, our criteria is the actual sales rep. So I'm going to click here, Control Shift down arrow, and I'm going to hit the F4 key. Now that needs to be locked in all directions. No matter where I go, I just need to look at that column, comma. Now, what's the criteria? The criteria is whatever the sales rep in this row is. Now, when I copy it over like this, we need to be locked on Joe. But when we copy it down across the rows, we need to move relatively. So I'm going to put the $sign in front of the column reference, comma. And here's the average range. Notice we have January, February, March set up in the same horizontal order as our columns over here. So watch this. We click in January because our formula is being built in the January column here. Control Shift down arrow. F4, but not just once. Think about this. When we copy it down across these rows here, we want it locked on January. We don't want this whole text block of a range of cells to move down as we copy it down. So I'm going to hit the, we want it locked going down, so I'm going to hit the F4 key once. But when we copy the average if function over to February, we want this whole range of cells to actually move over to February. So that's the reason we don't have a cell reference in front of the B or the B. Close parentheses. And now I've highlighted all the cells. So to populate all the cells with the formula, hold Control and tap Enter. Now, let's go look. Click in this cell and hit F2. Is that not totally cool? That February, the whole range changed. I click over here and hit F2. Whoa, the March one changed too. So that's an example of when an actual range has part of the references locked, but not the other part. Now, if you want a formula for 2003 or earlier, you can click over here, and it would have to be a sum product. And a similar thing there also. We have this range right here, part of it locked, and part of it not locked. All right, now get this. We're starting to get more advanced formulas, but it's not just for formulas that you do cell references. There is conditional formatting. There is data validation, both of which we'll see in examples of. There's also defined named formulas, which we're not going to do here, that can have relative and absolute and mixed cell references. All right, so here, let's go look at the solution here. Here's what we want to do with conditional formatting. Every time I do my bank reconciliation, I dump my data from the internet, and I have a little template. I have my records and their records. I want to come over. These are my records. And every time I find this particular item on my bank statement, I want to put a Y here, hit Enter, and have the whole row come up a color. That is done with conditional formatting. And conditional formatting is going to use a true false formula. I'm going to come over here, and here's our true false formula. Now, the way conditional formatting works is you have to highlight the whole range, all of the cells that are going to get this conditional formatting. And just like when we did a formula, we put a formula in the active cell, and when we did Control Enter, it copied to all the cells. That's the same thing that's going to happen to here with our true false formula, except the formula won't be stored in the cells. It'll be stored in memory in the conditional formatting dialog box. Now, conditional formatting, there's a keyboard shortcut, and I have some notes over here. Any version, the keyboard shortcut for conditional formatting is Alt-O-D. Alt-O-D. And then I'm going to click New Rule, and then click Use Formula. In earlier versions, you have to use that first text box and point to Is Formula. Now, here, we got to build a true-false formula here. The active cell is the cell that we have to build our formula as if the point of view is from this cell. So watch this. This cell, this cell, this cell, this cell, and this cell all need to be looking at that cell and saying, Is there a y? So I'm going to start my formula by clicking in this cell right here, even though the formula in memory is being stored in this cell. Now, if I'm going to copy across this direction here, and it needs to always be asking, does that cell right there have a y? It needs to be locked going this way. But when you copy it down to the next row, it can't be locked on this one. It has to move down to the next one. So how do you do that? When you copy a formula across the rows and you want it locked, you put a $ in front of the column reference. But if you want it to move relatively as you go down, there should be no $ in front of the row reference. So right in the conditional formatting dialog box, I'm going to hit the F4 key once and twice. There it is. That is column locked, row not. And now I need to say, is that cell equal to, and I've put my y over here. You could put y in quotes if you want also. Right? So, and that needs to be locked in all directions. Now you come to Format, Fill, and I'm going to pick yellow. Click OK. Click OK. Click OK. And now watch this. Every time I'm doing my bank rec, Y, 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 Y. Boom. I have done conditional formatting using cell references. We used an absolute and a mixed cell reference with a column lock and not the row. Now let's go over to 14. We're going to see another conditional formatting cell reference trick. But this one, notice they're getting more and more complicated. This one's going to involve mixed cell references, relative cell references, and an expandable. Oh, actually, no, not this one. This one's just going to be our 15th one will have an expandable range. We're going to use a function, a formula, true-false formula, inside the conditional formatting dialog box that's asking the question, are there duplicates in this column? So for right now, I have rad, rad, and rad. I want a visual cue that will color these red so I can go back and fix them. And if I fix them, I want the conditional formatting to turn off. So here's how it works. Same as just a moment ago if you're doing conditional formatting. Highlight all the cells you want conditional formatting. And we're going to build our formula from the point of view of that active cell. So I'm going to say Alt-OD. New rule. I'm going to click on Use Formula. I'm going to click right here. And now, count if equals count if, open parentheses. And now I have to highlight the entire column here. Notice by default it comes up locked. But this is product line 1. This is product line 2. I only want this formula as it's copied down in memory to be locked on this column. When the formula in memory gets copied over to this column, it needs to move to this column. So that whole range is right there. I'm going to hit the F4 key and lock it only in front of the row reference, not the column reference. That way, this formula will, when it gets over to product line 2, we'll be looking at the product line 2 information. Comma, that's the range. And what is the criteria for counting? It's going to be the actual cell. And we're going to have to use a relative cell reference, F4, F4, F4. That right there. That formula will deliver a number. Right now, it would deliver a 3, a 3, and a 3 to each one of those cells. But what is it that we're interested in here? We want a true when it is greater than 1. Because right here, this formula will deliver a 1 because there's only one red in this column. So what do we do to convert this function that delivers a number, either 3, 1, 2, etc., or 0 if there aren't? Well, in this case, there won't be any zeros. To convert it from a function that delivers a number to a true false, we simply do a comparative operator. Is that result from the countif greater than 1? If that's true, we want to be told with a color. So I'm going to click Format. I'm going to pick red. I'm going to click Font, white, click OK, click OK, click OK. And just like that, we are told. Now, if I change this to radical, you see the color goes away. And then I change this to rad cool. The color goes away for all of them. Now, let's just try this. Cool. I can't type. Cool. Kool. Cool. So as soon as I'm typing into this column, as soon as I type a duplicate, I get a warning, a visual warning. Now, let's go over, that's conditional formatting. Let's go over to our last example of cell references. And this is going to involve data validation. In essence, what we want here is I want to, when I type in, I don't want the color. I don't want it to ever even go into the cell. When I type a rad here, I want to get a message that says no duplicates. And you can do that with data validation custom. Custom requires a true-false formula. Now, the tricky thing here, unlike this over here we let all the cells get delivered. So right now, if we did count if, this would be a 2, this would be a 2. Greater than 1, that would be a true and a true. But for this over here, we want to allow the first one, but not the second one. So we're going to use mixed cell references, a relative cell reference, and expandable range like we saw in trick number 10. Right? So this is data validation, and just like with conditional formatting, the true-false formula is going to go into memory, and you've got to build it as if you were building it in this cell right here. All right, the keyboard shortcut that works in all versions is Alt-DL. You can see it right there, Alt-DL. We don't want to allow any value. We want to allow custom. And this requires a formula. Now, I remember when I first saw this, I was like, what? A formula? Ah, but the formula has to deliver either a true or a false. So watch this. We're going to do equals count if. If I can spell this right. And we need an expandable range, because as it gets copied down, it needs to expand the range. Right now, it needs to be looking at A2 to A2, so it counts the rad. We're going to say, and it will get 1, and that'll be fine. But when it gets down, the expandable range gets down here, and there's a second rad, it'll deliver a 2, and that's not OK. So our range is going to be A2. I'm going to do shift colon, which is what I should have done earlier when I did number 10. Shift colon puts in A2 to A2. Now, what we want to do is we want to lock just the row reference. So I'm going to hit F4, F4. What this means is that as I copy down, it will expand. But because we're not locking the A, when we move over to product line 2, the B will move, and it will restart a new expandable range for this column. All right, so we're doing mixed cell references and expandable ranges here. Now, then we got to go comma and click on the A2, which is a relative cell reference. Right now, it will deliver 1, and then over here is a 2. But let's think about this. We want the data validation to pop up when it is less than 1. So we want a true to say when it's 1. But as soon as it gets to 2, we want a false, which then will trigger our error message. So I'm going to say is less than 2. That way, when it gets above 2, it'll trigger a false. Right now, this will give us a true, which means true, it's OK to put in the cell. But right here, because the countif will deliver a 2 here, that is not less than 2. It'll deliver a false, which says you're not allowed to put this into the cell. Error alert. I'm going to say no duplicates. And you could put any funny message here you want. All right, I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to type rad. And it says no duplicate. So now I'm going to put rad cool. 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 And now I get that message. Now let's try it over here. If it worked, over here, rad. OK, it gets it. I'm going to say cancel. Now let's see if it worked over here. Fad. Fad. All right, so that is a lot about cell references. Whoever made it through all 15 tricks here, in regards to cell references. If you understand all of the stuff we did in this video, you are an exceptionally great Excel master, because very few people, at least in my experience, if you go out there and survey all the people every day working in Excel, very few people know all of the cell references, all four. But if you do, you are just allowed to do all sorts of amazing things in Excel. All right, we'll see you next time.